I'm ready to go, and good morning from New Jersey.
Wonderful.
Thank you all for joining us for what is the very first contribution panel for the workshop. I'm Fred Roberts. I'm one of the workshop organizers, and I'm joining you from the DIMAC Center at Rutgers University. So here's how this session is going to work. I'll call each panelist to make a presentation, a 3-minute recap of their talk. Then we'll all open up the floor for questions. Everyone is welcome to participate, but hold your questions until all the presentations are done. We're recording the session for release to other participants after the event. So if you don't wish to be on camera, then put your questions in the chat. And we have somebody who's monitoring the chat who will share the questions that you have. Otherwise, raise your hand and we'll call on you. So I'd like to invite the first panelist. We've had a last-minute replacement. In place of Pia Andrews, we're going to have her collaborator, Tim Sousa. His talk is titled Trust, Truth, and Authenticity in the Digital Age. So Tim, you're on.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you all for welcoming me to this. I am a last-minute ringer. Pia Andrews unfortunately came down with a rather terrible cold. Pia and I have been collaborating recently on a paper called A Trust Framework for Government Use of Artificial Intelligence and Automated Decision-Making. The basis for this is that in our observation and working with various governments around the world, we're seeing a lot of governments all over the place rushing to adopt automated processes. And this generally is a quest for efficiency and an attempt to obtain some cost savings. But governments have a very different context to, say, private sector businesses. Businesses are motivated by a profit incentive. They're trying to make a profit. In the case of listed companies, there's a fiduciary duty of those companies, of the executives of those companies, to act in the interests of their shareholders and maximize profits. Governments aren't driven by profits, but are rather driven by the public interest, or at least in an ideal world, they should be. Governments have greater power than private sector corporations. If you're unhappy with your bank, you can choose another bank. Choosing another government tends to be a much more difficult proposition. Most people don't have a choice as to whether to interact with their government. They are required to do it as part of living in the society in which they live. So between the combination of numerous problematic or failed government automation projects or technology projects, increasing public concern over artificial intelligence and machine learning in the private sector spaces, and then the pressures of a global pandemic, what we're seeing is that trust in governments and public sector agencies is at record lows. Not just in Australia or Western liberal democracies, but there's a definite global trend. So from our perspective, governments need to make something of a shift in their approach. They can't merely continue to demand trust from their citizens, from their residents. They need to demonstrate through their actions that they are trustworthy. So the paper that we've put together proposes recommendations for governments and for government systems, so technology platforms, their operations, their culture, their government, the way that they engage with their citizens, that are intended to help them improve public confidence and trust in public institutions, policies, and services, while better enabling them to meet the special obligations and responsibilities of the public sector. It's an effort to provide a toolkit to governments to adopt these technologies to deliver better outcomes for their citizens, rather than simply cheaper outcomes for government agencies. I hope that is a sufficient explanation of the paper and what I'm here to talk about.
So thank you very much, Tim. And thank you for stepping in at the last minute. Let's go next to Caitlin Bentley. from King's College London and University of Sheffield. Her colleague, Jesegna Mayoya, and my apologies if I've butchered the pronunciation of your name.
No, that's perfect. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to come today either. I'm sure many people can understand she's fighting with her PhD at the moment and couldn't make it. But yes, thank you so much, Fred. And it's lovely to be here with you all today. I've been having a wonderful time catching up with people and seeing some familiar faces. But I'm here today to talk about our research on intersectional approaches to data. And a core problem that we're trying to address is that taking a one-size-fits-all approach to developing socially responsible algorithms tends to leave some people behind, excluded, or marginalized in some way. And intersectionality is a theory and a praxis that is changing the way that policymaking and research is done. And our goal is really to see how we can develop this paradigm to support better data science and towards the development of socially responsible algorithms. And there are sort of three things that are useful to know about intersectionality. The first is that it's commonly understood as an analytical framework that can be used to understand how multiple aspects of a person's identity, like their gender, race, or ethnicity, come together in a time and a place, and together it shapes their advantage or disadvantage that a person faces. The second thing is that lived experience is what is primarily used to recognize and acknowledge how multiple systems of oppression, like sexism, racism, ageism, are all connected to systems of power, like institutional cultures, policy, law. And then the third thing to know is that intersectionality is an idea. It's the idea that structural inequalities then result from interactions between those power relationships, contexts, and people with those relative advantages and disadvantages in a particular time and place. So intersectionality research has really exploded in the past 5 years. It's taken a shape across so many different disciplines, and it's also now being promoted in policymaking spheres. What piques my curiosity is that in the engineering and IT fields, there's not been much take up so far. So we thought that a good way to learn some lessons from what has been going on in this field was to try and make sense of all of that research that's been taking place. And of course, you know, what else can you do during a pandemic but read 2,000 articles? So our analysis has really been focused on how relationships between data researchers or policymakers and data contexts are strengthened or changed by intersectional approaches. And we use an author named Patricia Hill Collins' frames of relationality to unpack those relationships. And we found that while there's been a lot of take-up across many different disciplines, the dominant way that researchers enact an intersectional approach is underpinned by an additive thinking frame. And what that means essentially is that we were talking about facial recognition technology earlier in the week. If you think about Joy Boalamwini's work, that if you add gender and skin color together, you can find out something new about the outcomes of facial recognition technology that you didn't know before. And that's really valuable. I'm not arguing that it's not valuable, but one of the weaknesses of this frame is that it's hard to connect those outcomes to systems of oppression that cause them. And it also doesn't highlight the responsibility of researchers or policymakers themselves in making technological systems and algorithms socially responsible. And so for data science, we think that more needs to be done to make relationships between data scientists, data contexts, and underrepresented groups more explicit or a main focus. And we propose that Collins' articulation or co-formation frames would be useful to develop for that purpose. And we give some examples in our presentation. But right now I could just say, for example, in data collection, we saw a number of ways like doing preliminary ethnographic study before collecting data, or thinking about the ordering of questions that you ask, the language of questions, who is asking them, how they're asking, place in which they're asked. These strategies all stand to strengthen relationships between researchers, data contexts, and underrepresented groups. And as I said, we sort of feel that more needs to be done to develop intersectional development data science. And in our paper, we provide some recommendations for that.
Well, thank you very much, Caitlin. So finally, I'd like to invite Ned Cooper to the stage. Ned is from the ANU School of Cybernetics, and the talk is together with collaborator Ellen Broad, and the title is Enabling Participation in the Review of Algorithms, Lessons from Law Reform.
Thank you, Fred. As Fred said, I'm Ned. I'm a PhD candidate here at the ANU, and Ellen Broad's associate professor at the ANU. And the question in our presentation was, how might the public participate in the functions of an AI safety commissioner? So you might ask, what is an AI safety commissioner, or why are we looking at that? So we're doing so because last year in Australia, there was a pretty well publicised report from the Australian Human Rights Commission that recommended the creation of this new AI safety commissioner. And this was one of the proposed functions of this commissioner was to monitor and investigate developments and trends in the use of AI and automated decision making in Australia by governments, but also by private organisations operating in Australia. And the report, along with that recommendation, argued that one of the principles of a human rights approach would be that people affected by new technologies need to participate in decision-making about those technologies. So Ellen and I wanted to figure out how this participation might work, and particularly to forecast what some of the issues might be for participation if this AI safety commissioner comes to be. So to do that, Ellen and I discussed our experiences actually participating in the processes of law reform in Australia in a range of inquiries. Ellen more related to copyright and law reform, copyright and intellectual property. I won't go into detail about the processes, but I wanted to give an overview of my most recent experience working with the Australian Law Reform Commission, because I think it's kind of instructive on some of the potential issues for participation for an AI safety commissioner. So back in 2016, the government of the day commissioned an inquiry into laws and policies that lead to the over-incarceration of Aboriginal people in Australia. And I was a lawyer at the Aboriginal Legal Service at the time. And I ended up leading our response to the inquiry, and my team and I spent basically months facilitating the participation of Aboriginal people in this review. And we did so along with dozens of other community-based organisations. And then eventually in 2017, the Law Reform Commission collated all the proposals for reform we worked on and reported back to the government. And that report was pretty widely supported by the whole, the group of people who had participated in the process. And now that report sat accumulating dust for 5 years. There's been no real action on it. And that's led to like a lot of frustration. And it's really unlikely many of those organizations, the people involved in those organizations, will participate in similar reviews, at least with the same sort of effort or interest. So I just want to finish by noting that there's 3 issues we saw for participation of the public in reviewing algorithms and algorithmic decisions, based on my experience in the review of laws and that of Ellen. The first is that these processes require significant resources on the part of participants, and small organizations often have to redirect resources from service delivery to respond to inquiries like these. Secondly, as I noted in more detail in the longer presentation, the government of the day, in Australia at least, commissions the Law Reform Commission to conduct its inquiries. And so this sort of institutional arrangement, if it was reflected in the AI Safety Commissioner, it could really limit the Commission from reviewing algorithms and algorithmic decisions that might be challenging for the government. And then finally, where participation is not reflected in government action, there is often really significant frustration. That's it. I just wanted to raise those 3 points, and I think they relate quite nicely to some of the discussions that Tim and Caitlin and Jasanga started, so I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Ned. I'd now like to open up the floor for discussion. So either raise your hand or put a question in the chat, and we'll take it from there. And maybe I'll start the discussion off by picking up on the one of the last points that Ned made, because I noted that participation in the oversight of decision-making algorithms by a variety of stakeholders really came up in all the presentations. But as Ned pointed out, participation requires resources. So whether it's time or money or staff or internet access or whatever. So this raises a problem for me. So how do you avoid participation favoring those who have the resources? So that's really a question for all three of the speakers. And take them in any order you like.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if Caitlin had a response to that, because I thought there was some really interesting examples in your presentation and some discussed by Jasanga about sort of hackathons and various methods that Jasanga had been involved in getting input from people on sort of algorithms or the problems that algorithms are applied to.
So the question is about, can you just repeat the question again so that I understand it?
Yeah, so my question is, if you want to get many points of view and have many stakeholders participate in decision-making, and especially with regard to algorithms, that requires resources. And not all stakeholders have as many resources as others. So how do you avoid favoring the participation of those who have the resources to participate?
Well, yeah, I would say money is probably a good bet. But yeah, I think I also have a similar question for Ned as well, in terms of like how technology can be a space for participation, which might reduce some of the costs of participation. I can tell you what tends to happen, or what has been a focus of experimentation, and that is going to different places. So holding workshops or public consultations in rural areas, in far off places, away from city centers, in smaller villages where people who are typically excluded tend to live. Other ways have been to co-design activities or hold participatory workshops in which people can be paid for their time as a valuable member. These techniques aren't really new though, and it's not really an easy problem to solve, I would say. And that is why I'm sort of interested in thinking about how technological systems can be incorporated as a space for participation. And we know quite a lot that like social media, it has like a low barrier to participation, so people will do it more easily, but it has its limits, and then you don't really know who's participating, or you can't be clear about who's still being excluded or not, and so forth. So I think we just need some innovation in this space and some more research And that's why I think I was hoping Ned would like pick that up and do some of that. Yeah.
My experience has been very much like yours, Caitlin, in terms of, relying on workshops, relying on co-design processes. But as Fred points out, that in itself takes resourcing. And so the answer is, how do we deal with the resourcing? Well, the entity with the resources has to invest those resources. So if you're a government looking to implement new algorithmically supported service delivery, then you're going to have to spend some time bringing in the subjects of your policy to make sure that they're represented in how the policy is designed. And as the entity with the power and with the resourcing, it is incumbent upon you to dedicate that time. So the answer is to not run away from the resourcing problem. It is to focus the question of resourcing and the resourcing burden on those participants in the process that are able to bear it, and have them subsidize those who do not have the resources.
So I would throw in one more question here. And that is, so some of those resources are money, and maybe those can be addressed. Sufficient skill with technology, education required to understand technological issues, and so on, that's much harder. And there's still inequities there that are harder to overcome.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like there's a capability gap sometimes when there's reviews on, well, sorry, in at least law reform, that was essentially my job, was to translate between Aboriginal communities who had experiences of legal discrimination, but not some people within that community without experience in sort of legal education. So it was sort of translating some of the effects of laws to the sort of reform of those laws. And I think in the case of algorithms and technology, there's a similar capability gap, but I think there's an opportunity as well to do sort of proactive education about latest developments and trends. And this is probably a role for something like the AI Safety Commissioner into the communities in which may be affected by future technologies. So one of the things the Australian Law Reform Commission used to do was roadshows just about current issues in discussion in the legal community, not necessarily the subject of a review, but maybe of interest to some people in the community, invite people along to learn about them. So I think there's a role for that proactive work, but I do think that role probably sits with commissions rather than the organisations that represent some of these smaller communities with smaller resources, because there was this real problem working in the Aboriginal legal service where we were often directed away from actually delivering services to the clients that we or the people that we represent, to just responding and going to these meetings with police and government lawyers. So yeah, I think there's a proactive role for a commission in this space.
Okay, I see Alexis, you have your hand up. You're next.
Yes, just to add to the discussion about participation, I may report very briefly. We had an experience of running a 6 months, let's say, participative workshop. Joseph was involved in that with one of my PhD students in Tunisia about groundwater management. No, now the cost of running the real cost, not counting my time, Joseph's time, my PhD student salary, etc., etc. So the running costs exceeded 10,000 euros. To organize the meetings, the interviews, the workshops, having a facilitator because the local people speak Arab and the rest of us do not speak Arab. And I mean, the running costs of doing a participation exercise, which by the way was a research exercise. It was not I mean, we're not solving the problem for somebody. We were trying to experiment a new type of participation format, etc. No? So there is a real resource problem. 10,000 euros in Tunisia is a huge amount of money. So if it was not for the sponsors in France, it will be impossible to do it locally. No? Now, I have a question instead. No? And please forgive me because it will be very politically incorrect, what I'm going to say. No? Now, if we want to take into account minorities, if we want to take into account groups that are, we need to do statistics about that. No? So we need to do what in Europe is strictly forbidden is racial statistics or ethnic statistics or religious statistics. No? Something which I repeat in Europe is strictly forbidden. Now, it's not only a matter of being forbidden. No, the reason for which it's forbidden and to which I regularly think about is that if you do statistics about communities, it is a way to keep these communities as they are. No? I consider myself, you see, I was born in Greece. I studied in Italy. I work in France. No? If they do any ethnic statistic in Europe, which group I should belong to and why? My son, the kids of my son, to which group they should belong? No? If we use this type of statistics, I repeat, this is a way to maintain the composition of the society as we see it today, but not as we would like to see it tomorrow. No? So is the trade-off value of keeping racial statistics so that we can see that we have an unfair society, but we already know it. We don't need statistics to know that our society is unfair, or we should do something, or we should have a different view of this type of problem. So that's my very general provocation. Thanks.
All right, who wants to take the landmine question?
I can go for it, but you can go first if you want.
No, I had a big rant already, so why don't you start, Caitlin, and I'll jump in after you.
Okay, maybe somebody, let me read that landline question. That's from Jacqueline Randalls. It says, hi all, from my experience as a comms and engagement practitioner, public engagement is usually incredibly under-resourced and rarely conducted in a two-way. Engagement in a grassroots sense to meaningful facilitate participation is an essential budget item and needs to be costed by those with expertise in this area. All right, that's the question. So go ahead, Tim.
Sorry, I meant Alexis's question. But let's start with Jackie's observation. Yes, okay. Absolutely. We need to budget to bring in. We need to budget for inclusivity. We need to budget to bring in the subjects of policy so that they can have a voice in how that policy is created. Otherwise, we're going on with what policymakers who are generally in an ivory tower and divorced from the impact of the policy, we're going with what their assumptions are, or at least what their beliefs are based on the data that's available to them. And that data is always going to be a rough estimate, which brings us to Alexis's point, like, do we collect data about sensitive topics like race, ethnic origin, gender, or do we try to ignore those? And look, I think we have to collect that data, but we have to be realistic about the limitations of that data. And in that respect, it's no different from any other data we collect. Caitlin, I thought, I think you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, I would agree and completely. And you have to question who is collecting the data and who is analyzing the data and who is governing it as well. And if the answer if there's no relationships between the people who are collecting and managing and governing that data and the underrepresented groups that the data is about, then I would say there's a problem there. And that's what we're trying to bring up. There's not only a limitation to the data itself, but there's also a limitation to statistical methods, especially when you start to divide people into these smaller and smaller subgroups. And you're completely right about people have multiple membership categories, I would say, and there is never a fixed thing. So these things are fluid and it changes. And so it's really dependent on the context and what you're using this data for. And in terms of the limitations of statistical methods and how, when you're kind of narrowing categories or combining different aspects of people's identities in a particular place, then statistical methods just won't give you any inference or prediction because there's not enough people. And you're seeing now in the UK, the Office of the National Statistics, like a statistics organization saying, okay, we can't do statistics. We need to come up with some new methods here. And this is where we need to be a bit more creative and combine different modalities of analysis, different stages of data collection and analysis, and work more collaboratively with people who have different kinds of knowledge than statistics to be effective.
Okay, well, I see that Liz has her hand raised. Go ahead, Liz.
Thank you. I have one question in the chat, but I have a follow-up question just briefly. I'm curious about, given this conversation, you know, if you're going to collect this kind of data, for example, I want to go back to your point, Tim, about, you know, trustworthy government. What does trustworthy mean for you in the context of this? Like, what would that look like?
So for me, a trustworthy government process is a process that you are not required to take on faith that it is operating appropriately. Too often with automated systems, they're black boxes. Input goes in, output comes out, and you just have to assume that that output is correct. That's not a great position to be if you're at the pointy end of a government process and the process is adverse to you. So you want a system where the decision-making process is transparent. It's clear what rules are being applied. It's traceable. It's clear what evidence the rules are being applied to and how those rules were applied to the evidence. Where it's accountable, where it's clear who is making the decision, and ultimately, because it's government, and this is generally a requirement of government decisions, that it's appellable. So if you feel that there's a mistake that's been made, if there is an issue with the rules, or that there's been an error in the evidence that was used, you can appeal that and seek a review of the decision. Now, this isn't like out there thinking, these are the basic principles of administrative law. But what we've seen over the last decade of automation in government is that there's been a rush to automation without actually building the automated processes in a way that comply with the rules of administrative law. So we need to backtrack and redesign the way that those processes are working. If we have those four key requirements, transparent, traceable, accountable, and appellable, you are no longer required to trust the process because the process is worthy of trust. It's demonstrable through the way that the process is constructed and through the information that you're provided that the decision has been made correctly. You don't need to trust it because you can verify it for yourself. So that's what I think a trustworthy process looks like.
Okay, so I see, Caitlin, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a question for Tim as well, because I was interested in how you brought up the point about like the government's power to do violence and their power, like their ultimate power, essentially. And how would you suggest that socially responsible algorithms could support identifying whether or not a government is operating in the citizens' best interests?
That is an interesting one. So when you say a socially responsible algorithm, what kind of analysis are you thinking of?
Well, it could be anything. I think, you know, if the government, you're talking about from the government's perspective, how do they build trust, right?
Yeah.
So how would they then communicate in their actions that they are acting in the citizens' interest, that they are essentially a good government and not an evil one?
Well, I mean, the ability to provide proof is there. I mean, a lot of this is not a question of how do we use the algorithms to demonstrate good behavior, because the algorithms are simply a means to an end. The automation is simply a means to an end. In many cases, what we're doing is simply allowing the delivery of policy intent faster. So the question is really, is the policy a good one? And that is a subjective question. The policy is going to be good for some people and it's going to be bad for some people. The question is whether it is overall good for society, and you could demonstrate that through a number of different techniques. A statistical analysis could be one way. Measuring the human outcomes or the human impacts on different demographics could be another way. I would encourage the latter over the former because statistics are limited, and they often don't measure things like human impacts because those are difficult to quantify. But what we end up then is measuring through financial outcomes, and financial outcomes are only a slight measure of the picture. A lot of hands up. So Jasmine, you're top left on my screen, so let's start with you.
Thanks. We've seen today a release of a report from Choice, which has been referred on to the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner around facial recognition. And so thinking about the idea of an AI safety commissioner, the report didn't really gave more of a guidance role than an enforcement role. How do you see that deconfliction working when we've got an existing group that does have this perception because of the Privacy Act, including for sensitive data, which biometric comes under, interacting? Because when you have two government bodies who can't decide who rules, that often means neither acts. And so is there a challenge by creating a new commissioner or a new commission that we end up with a bit of a turf war that actually gets us worse outcomes? Is that a real risk that the panel sees? I'm interested in Ned and the panel's perspective.
Can I take this one first, Ned? Because I'm a regulatory guy. So I spent quite a lot of time working with the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, and I now work in a number of different regulatory contexts. But this is not a new problem. Like the OASC is already dealing with competing commissioners like the National Data Commissioner. Sorry, for the international members of the group here, the OASC is the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, which is the national privacy regulator here. But in other regulatory spheres, the OASC also has to deal with the Securities and Investment Commission, the Prudential Regulatory Authority, the Communications and Media Authority, all honing in on different areas of privacy risk in different contexts. So I don't necessarily think that there's going to be a problem if there's a different commissioner. I think the question is whether there needs to be a different commissioner, or as was done with the OASC, where they combined privacy, freedom of information, and overall information policy within the federal government, whether there could be a super agency that covers different overlapping areas of data risk, of the risks that arise in the way that we handle, use, process data. But otherwise, frankly, regulators are pretty used to these days collaborating, working with each other. And what I've observed lately is not that regulators are afraid to step in because there's an overlap, but that they all step in and that you have 4 or 5 overlapping investigations of the same incident. Which can be useful if you want to really, really punish a particular,
really make a point,
but isn't necessarily the best or most efficient way to allocate regulatory resources. Ned, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, just briefly to say that the Tech Policy Design Centre here at the ANU did release a report recently where they interviewed a range of different commissioners that had some oversight of anything to do with sort of automated decision making in Australia, and most of the commissioners argued that, all I think said that we shouldn't establish a new commissioner and there should be more coordination mechanisms. I would note that the Australian Human Rights Commissioner has changed since the report last year to the one that was interviewed for this report. So I think that reflects the change in decision or suggestion. But yeah, a lot of the commissioners today in Australia think that we should coordinate more rather than establish a new commissioner.
Okay, so I see we have two people with hands up. Liz, is your hand still up or?
Well, there's questions in the chat, but actually I think Lauren's question may have just been answered or at least addressed in some sense. Lauren, please tell me if that's not the case, or if you feel like that's not the case. So I might put my hand down.
Okay, in that case, so let's go again to Alexis and then we'll go to the questions in the chat.
Actually, I had a comment, not a question, to Kathleen's question about how do we know whether a policy has been good, let's say. I don't think there is a way to do it. Policies are by definition, as Tim said, are positive for somebody and negative for somebody else. Policies include somebody and automatically exclude somebody. No? And the choice of who do we include and who do we exclude is a matter of political values. So a right-wing government will include and exclude somebody, and the left wing will do the opposite, perhaps. I mean, it's not even sure, no? So there is no way to establish what it is a common good that for which the policy should aim, let's say. It is subjectively defined at a certain point in our society. We establish temporarily that something is considered to be a common good. Let's say water quality, no? But by change, no? So there's no way to establish, in my opinion, how this holds.
Good and bad are moral judgments. Those are difficult to measure. What you can measure is whether policy intent flows through to policy implementation. So if your intent is to save X dollars, you can measure whether you saved X dollars. The difficulty arises, the problem arises where we are only measuring the things that are easy to measure and thereby ignoring the things that are hard to measure, even when the things that are hard to measure are in fact the better indicator of policy intent. So if you're trying to improve well-being, it's probably not particularly helpful to measure the financial implications of the policy, because that is a poor measure of well-being. So we need to put more time into measuring the difficult to measure, the qualitative rather than the quantitative. Ned?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the question Alexis posed earlier about statistics and collecting statistics on sensitive attributes. Look, I don't have a good answer for the question. I just want to note it, but policy is a really contested space, as Alexis noted, and information is really important and useful for all the various players that take part. It's the fuel for that contest, and so it's useful for a lot of different people in that contest. Not only those who, not only say the original person who collects that data, whether it be a government or a private organization. But it's a really interesting question about collecting sensitive attributes and whether it's it's a good or a bad thing. The only thing I did want to note was something that Kathy Reed, who's she's in there as tech help, but she's so much more than that. She made a great point the other day about data entry and how that's an important stage in this sort of collection of sensitive attributes. And for example, for gender, where you have a open box where someone can enter in the information as they would like, might be a better way of people providing data on those sensitive attributes rather than selecting from a sort of a multiple choice entry. I don't have a good answer about how to socially responsibly use that data, but I did think Kathy made a good suggestion about how we collect that data.
Okay, so maybe we should go. There's still a number of comments and questions in the chat. Maybe I can read Loki's 2 comments, and then we can get some response to them. So first, I have used design thinking, human-centered design processes, which heavily engage with stakeholders. And the second comment is I have suggested that a body similar to ATSB, NTSB be created for digital technologies, including AI, which emphasizes safety, but also developing a body of knowledge that could inform the regulator. Any comments about either of those remarks?
So on the idea of the ATSB or the NTSB, so a AI safety board, I don't think it's a bad idea. One problem that we are experiencing currently, and I'm hoping it's temporary, is that a lot of regulators lack the in-house capability to appropriately regulate on these issues. They don't necessarily have people like the people in this room who have deep knowledge on automation, on machine learning, on AI, and can deploy that knowledge in a way that is suitable for regulatory investigations. That is it's a capability gap, and it's the kind of thing that takes time to solve. And I assume that they are working on solving it. But having a dedicated institution that has more technical capability could be one way of doing it. Another way is making sure that the regulators embed the knowledge themselves, so it's more distributed and we're uplifting all boats.
Okay, I see one more question in the chat. This looks like this is to Caitlin. I think it's from Jasmine. It says, Caitlin, in your opinion, how do we bring more intersectionality into how we measure policy outcomes?
Oh, that was from Tim, but that's a good
Oh,
question.
it's from Tim. Okay. Oh, yes, it's from Tim. Sorry, can't read. But go ahead, Caitlin.
Yeah, I think what I've learned is that this field is so diverse, and there's so many ways that you could pick. I'm sure all would be valuable, or many would be valuable. There's a lot of differences in how you would try and understand outcomes. So you might focus on similarities within a group of people and try and understand their experience of a policy. There's also picking people based on differences as well. So trying to get a diverse cohort of people to weigh in on policy. When you have more quantitative approaches, you tend to have similar strategies, but just on a larger scale. So using stratified sampling to kind of ensure that you've reached a full group of across a population. But I think many of those approaches don't take into account what I was talking about in terms of connecting these policy outcomes for different groups of people to the reasons why institutional racism or sexism or whatever has caused those differences in the first place. And it doesn't provide you any solutions on what to do next. And so I think this is really where I'm floundering and trying to come up with some good ideas and on how to make those connections clearer. And I don't have answers on that yet, but I'm thinking in terms of things like what Ned is talking about, how to bring more participation in various forms, how to look at knowledge generation from different angles, and so on and so forth. Anyhow, I'll shut up now.
Anyway, I think we are out of time, but I'm with apologies to the other organizers, I want to ask one more question, and I'll ask each of the speakers to give a 15-second answer. I'm struck by this discussion that pretty much everything we've said applies to public decision-making in general, not necessarily just to decision-making about AI and automated decision-making. What's different about AI?
Who do you want to start?
I'll just say briefly, I think people are forecasting that AI will be an important part of people's lives rather than it is at the moment. And I think a lot of people are trying to prepare for that. Right? Yeah, that's my perspective. I don't necessarily agree that it should, we should establish any processes or we should interrogate it any differently to we do it with existing sort of automated decision-making in government.
I disagree with that. What's different is that the AI, machine learning, automated decision-making allows you to make decisions faster and at greater scale. What that means is if it's a bad policy, if it's a bad process, you're going to do more damage more deeply and faster. That's what makes it dangerous. In terms of what's different about the decision, nothing. We should apply the same level of rigor. And I think we've lost that in some of the magical thinking that occurs with AI.
Caitlin, you have the last word.
I don't know. Optimistically, in my work, we're sort of focusing on how it's changing opportunities for people who have been excluded before. So I'm working with the Maritime Coast Guard Agency, and we're thinking about how remote operation of boats now opens up a new career or sector for people to work in that they've otherwise been excluded from before. And how would you design those dashboards and systems for people who need to get like a set of maritime knowledge by not actually being able to go out on sea, and what would you actually need to know about driving a boat if you never actually did it physically? But yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've taken enough time. This has been a very interesting session. I'd like to thank all the panelists for excellent presentations and everyone for a great conversation.